Today we have with us Sir Clayton Leaders, returning on the Herbal Hour podcast to talk about many fascinating topics related to health, mental health, social media, and anything else that we find of importance that we wish to discuss. How are you doing today, Clay?
So good. Thank you, Bogdan, for having me back on. Dr. McCarchick, I'm sorry. Yeah, glad to be back. Thank you.
Awesome. So can you tell our listeners a little bit about your background, what you study, if they haven't seen
it? I have a master's degree in public health, and I'm in my last year of naturopathic medical school in clinical studies right now. So that's exciting. Yeah, that's pretty much, I think, it.
Great. So we were talking last night a little bit about how social media might be influencing mental health in some ways in a beneficial way, and in other ways very negatively. So I just want to see what's your take on how social media in general affects us as a society, as a people.
I think it serves as a distraction from who we actually are in a lot of ways. And that comes into like spiritual, emotional, mental health, I guess, and even physical ramifications. And it really goes pretty deep, I think, which is why we're having this discussion, I think.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, yeah.
I was reading into some research. So there's been tons of research done on how social media might be impacting people's well-being. And one of the interesting things that I found was there was this distinction between active social media use and passive social media use, meaning that active social media use means you're engaging with people, you're having conversations, you're posting things that are important to you, etc. And passive use is you're just consuming social media. Like if you're on Instagram or Facebook, you're literally just scrolling, you're not interacting. And this study actually had a pretty wild percentage of how that was laid out between people. So the actual amount of engagement on Facebook and Instagram was in the low single digit percentage. Like it was a few percent of actual engagement when you look at the whole entire network. So what that means is that most people who are using social media most of the time are just looking through it. They're not necessarily talking to people. They might be, sending direct messages, but not like interacting directly. And this was a fascinating thing of this study because it actually correlated this kind of usage of consuming versus engaging with those negative impacts on mental health. So those that were just consuming social media, they were the people more likely to have negative implications from using social media frequently, which makes sense in a lot of ways.
Yeah, it definitely does. And like, I think that constant consumption, like, I think that's one of the key points of why social media, as we talked about last night, it is a tool for good. Like it can be a tool for good, but I think most people use it as a consumption, like you said, and they find it as like the main thing that like they base their life on, kind of, and that's hard to sort of think about because I think it's so distant from you, but I think it's an interesting conversation to have, and that's why we're having it, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that point that social media is a tool is really crucial. I think your video is back. Clay Leaders is back with us. Yeah, no problem. But the fact that social media is a tool, I think, is a really important place to start from, because there's a lot of polar opinions on social media. Oh, it's necessary if you're doing some kind of business venture. You need to have a social media. You need to do this and that to build your brand, to promote, etc. And then there's the other side that's, social media is inauthentic at times, and it leads to a lot of anxiety because people compare themselves with people that they see on social media, which is not really the true image. It's just, like we were talking about, a glimpse in time, and often only the positive aspect that they're choosing to reveal for obvious reasons. People don't necessarily want to share, their worst vulnerabilities and their pain on social media. I don't know if those posts are getting the most likes, so they're not really, stacking up in that sense. But the idea of it being a tool, I think, is a really important place to start from, because what that shows is that social media, depending on how you use it, is what effects you'll get from it. So if you use it in a way that, unconsciously, probably mostly, like scrolling through, constantly comparing, all these things, that will mess up your mind state. I mean, I do it too all the time. I have to catch myself while I'll be like scrolling through Instagram, and I'm just like, I just start feeling bad, and then I recognize, oh yeah, I need to stop doing that. Like, I need to just focus on making meaningful content, sharing things that are important, and engaging with people directly, going in back and forth, having real discussions, not just like looking through. Because any kind of actually unconscious activity has that kind of effect. If you think about it, if you do anything really very unconsciously, it usually doesn't lead to any kind of happiness. And that could be you could like read a book unconsciously, and it'll make you feel kind of bad after you read it. You're like, I just kind of wasted time. I don't remember what I read. Right.
Yeah, no, totally. I think like scrolling through, like, just going up and up and up, like scrolling down, it's continually subconsciously like making you uh, uh, compare yourself to, even if it's like a funny joke or a social justice issue. It's always making you rethink, even if you don't realize it. It's making you rethink like what you know
Mm.
believe.
Mm.
Um, and I think I forget your last point that you said, but um, uh, it's just the depth of it is unbelievable. Like how it impacts you, like subconsciously, because you, sorry, you don't think that you're seeing it as, it seems like a game, kind of, social media. Uh, it doesn't seem real because it's kind of not real, because you're always behind this.
Mm.
Well, even like you and I are behind a screen.
Yeah.
It seems unreal.
Yeah.
And I think that's
There's a
part of what,
disconnect aspect of it where
and
you
that's,
don't really get that, like, even if you do get, interaction and engagement on social media or discussion, it's not the same as, human to human real contact. It's interesting too in these past few months, because with the situation with quarantine, uh, people have been on their computers and on social media more than ever. And it's this new kind of world of interconnection where any idea that's spread can spread incredibly quickly, whether or not it's an idea that's like helpful for people, or it's an idea that puts people back. If it's like a fearful idea, or it's an idea that comes from a place of love. And I don't know if you've seen this, but there's been an amazing amount of flame wars, for lack of a better term, on Facebook, especially when certain topics get brought up, and you just see like, these are the posts that you'll see will have maybe 3 likes, but they'll have like 56 comments. And you'll just click in and you start reading it, and then you jump into the rabbit hole, and it's it's some contentious topic, whether it's the current nature of coronavirus, or it's the social institutions, or whatever. There's this really heated emotional debate on every front that gets brought up, especially on social media. And if you think about it, you would never really have that level of like, let's say like negativity towards people that you may kind of know, and even people that you are related to in a professional context. I remember on our professions, our school's Facebook, there was some controversy because people were making certain posts, and then they were getting into these arguments where they were literally like name calling each other, and these are like, you know, colleagues and, you know, fellow professionals and all this. And it goes to say is that wouldn't happen in person. In person, it's way easier to have a very civil conversation because you won't have that, you know, that blindness to think that you can just, you know, openly insult and become very angry and aggravated, and then kind of share maybe even things that are unrelated to the discussion into the discussion. So that's part of the, going back to your point, that's part of the big issues with social media as a form of communication, is that you don't really get a real human conversation. Because if a interpersonal conversation was like some of these flame wars that happen on social media, then it would literally just be a shouting match in the streets. Like people would just be yelling at each other, and those are, luckily those are relatively rare in general that I've seen, or, you know, even among like friends and people who know each other, I've seen this happen. So it gives a level of disconnect, and the same thing could be said of the internet in general, right? That
Yeah.
any technology, it gives this. Why do you think that is? Let's discuss that. Why is it over Facebook? Like, it's so much easier to tell someone to go F themselves and they're, you know, they're an idiot for having this belief, rather than in person. Like, who, you would be such a rare person to actually say that to a person they barely know in public.
Well, first of all, I think I just want to say, like, thank you for bringing up the school issue with like our discussions with school. Um, it has been an odd time for those discussions, but going forward, let's see. Why do I think that those? I think that maybe like I'm a. Do you know much about the Enneagram, Bogdan?
Yeah, I know. I know a little bit. It's comes from uh, Gordajev. You ever heard of Gordajev? He's the guy who originated the symbol of the Enneagram, and then it was kind of applied to the personality theory.
Okay, well,
Yeah.
technically, it's actually been around since early, like the early church back in the
Oh, okay. So
in
maybe he adopted it too. Maybe he
yeah,
worked with it.
yeah.
Okay.
Um, but I think a lot of why people feel so, you know, like empowered to go forward with attacking people on social media is that if you don't, if you're not looking someone in the eyes, I think they there's just like there's this disconnect between like yourself and who you're attacking, kind of.
Mm,
um because like in person you're going to look someone in the eyes, you're going to have to say like, I think eyes are very important, personally, like to, it's
the
like
wind just
a
soul.
connection. Yeah, exactly, yeah. And I think when you can just blatantly spout anything you want, um it just comes out and it doesn't matter because you're not looking someone in the eyes. I think that's
Mm,
really a part of it.
mm.
Um,
Yeah, that's definitely a big portion of it, is that the normal kind of etiquette and general principles and, you know, accepted rules of conversation, that you shouldn't
right.
openly insult someone and you
Yeah.
shouldn't, you know, attack their character if they have a belief different than
And
you. Although that
I
does
think
happen in personal conversations, but when it gets to that point, it's already like, you know, on the verge of a fist fight. Like, but on social media, it'll spiral, and it doesn't actually, I don't know what it leads to. It just leads to
no,
people like
exactly.
hating each other and not knowing
Exactly.
exactly who it is that they don't like.
And I think that's actually really exactly it, is because people, like some of the things that I see, said on social media, like if you said that in person, you get punched in the face, you know?
That's factual statement, sir.
It's absolutely true. But if you're on social media, if you're just like a Facebook post, it's you're not going to get punched in the face. So you can say anything you want to, you know?
Yeah, there's less immediate social consequences for
Right.
and then there's this weird popularity contest kind of thing that happens with social media where people take like a certain side, and then certain people will like that comment and other people dislike, will like that comment, and then they go back and forth, and it's so strange to see it, because what it seems to me is someone gets emotionally triggered by something that someone says. Maybe it's like a view that they disagree with or anything of that matter. But rather than acting how we typically do when we're, in public, of like, having self-restraint and trying to, choose our words carefully and considering the other person and, reflecting on, why that bothered us, or maybe saying something, but not necessarily in an aggressive or negative way. But on the internet, that filter never kicks in, and it goes from anger to I'm just going to write like everything that comes in my mind in response, and it's going to be like ad hominem attacks, attacking the person rather than having the discussion. And ultimately those discussions never lead to anyone being convinced of anything, which is always funny, because that's always, it seems to be the goal, the underlying goal of when you're having a flame war on social media, that you want to show the other person that you're really right and they're really wrong. And I don't know if that's ever happens. Maybe just ironically, maybe some person was like, yeah, you're right, whatever, because they were just done with the conversation. But has anyone's opinion ever been changed by like being attacked as a human? And this brings a kind of far ranging point, I think, into this, and into really all discussion on anything that's important to us. So there's this idea in philosophy, especially ancient philosophy, with Socrates, Plato, that one of the greatest tools for coming to truth is dialogue. They call it dialectic, a back and forth. But this is distinguished from an argument. It's not, one person's trying to prove the other person wrong and themselves right. It's this idea that two people are together and they both want to find out what's the truth. What can I learn from this? So they discuss it and they bounce each other's ideas off each other. Sometimes one will play the devil's advocate, but it's not in a manner of trying to disprove. It's a matter of how do we get to a truth? So it's kind of what we're doing here today, on the topic of social media. We know that there's issues with how social media affects society, our mental health, our well-being, but at the same time we see that there's a lot of great benefits. There's a lot of good that can come of it. People sharing their lives, people sharing educational content that really helps people. I mean, there's some great pages on Instagram that all they do is just post awesome things, like really good poems, or they'll post articles, and they'll post really well taken pictures of majestic sights. So there's a lot good on there too, but it's all kind of mixed in there with everything, because it's it's whatever someone would think to post. So I guess,
Yeah.
how do we use social media in a way that's beneficial for us and for society? Because you have to kind of start from this idea that social media is not going away. Like, it's gonna, like, social media, all it really means, in a sense, humans are always trying to connect and be social. It's the nature of a human. Now we have things like the internet, and then the invention of apps, which even channel that into a different kind of thing. So that's gonna keep getting more and more. I mean, so there's no stop to this process. But the question is, how can we be aware of the potential pitfalls of what social media does to us as people living in this society, and use it for our best?
Yeah. I mean, for sure, there are like huge benefits of social media. There are ways to, learn things you didn't know. be exposed to ideas, concepts that you should consider like deeply, in your own mind, like face things that are presented to you. I know there are a few pages that I follow that uh, give good news, in a time that good news is rare to find. And I think as far as like finding a way to, I don't know, there are pitfalls for sure. And I think when like you fall into those pitfalls, actually, can you repeat your question? I'm so sorry.
Yeah, the pitfalls of social media and how can we use it in a
Yeah,
way that's beneficial to us. I mean, that's the fundamental question, right? Because we're not, as I said, we're not getting rid of it. So it's not like you can
right.
choose to not participate in it, but that's not going to stop other people from doing the same. So any effects that are outside of the individual will still affect you from that.
Yeah, I mean, I think the pitfalls are like constantly comparing yourself to someone else, which I think 90% of social media, at least we're talking about, when we talk about social media, I should just say, mostly my understanding is based on Facebook and Instagram,
Mm-hmm.
mainly Instagram. And I see 90% of what Instagram is compare like people putting out their best. And I think that the pitfall of that is that there's always constant comparison. And there are so many health issues based on that. Like, I mean, we've studied, you and I, Dr. McCartrick, have studied psychology so far in our education, and that leads to like anorexia, and like a bulimia and all these things. And like that's a huge impact on someone's health. And it's not just for like the moment, because if you look at an Instagram post and you think, oh, I want to look like that, man or woman, it's not just in that moment. It's 20 years down the line that still impacts you, in my opinion. Um, and I think that's really the downfall of social media, is that it's just changing people's entire psychology,
Mm. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot to be said about ADHD, ADD, these kind of things, and electronics in general, social media being
yeah,
one of the forms of electronic usage, among the highest time used for many people. But our mind, our brain adapts to what is in front of us. That's what it's always doing. It doesn't matter if we want it to or don't want it to. Our nervous system, our psyche is constantly adapting to what is the scenario that I'm in, what is the situation I'm in. And much of what that is not even conscious to us. So with
yeah,
this idea of scrolling through and comparing, it's not necessarily even a conscious process. In some cases it can be when you feel like there's this idea that they were researching in these studies on social media and how it impacts people's mental health. It's called fear of missing out. It's like this concept. It's a
FOMO.
yeah, exactly. FOMO. I was trying not to say the acronym.
Sorry.
I just don't like it for some reason. But FOMO, yeah. So this idea that you're not feeling too good, you feel maybe a little bit down, etc. You're having a bad day. It's COVID times, so who isn't having a little bit of struggle with the isolation? And you scroll through social media and you see people on the beach and like really happy, and you just feel like worse because you feel like not only do you feel like crap, but something's wrong with you because it's just you. It's very isolating. The interesting thing is that we don't see the truth or the reality of the situation. That and I actually see this a lot on Instagram posts, which is it's pretty startling when you see it. But I saw this this picture of this woman who is like, smiling in a really cheerful mood and looking really happy and everything. And if you read the description of the post, she was basically saying how about 5 minutes later she had a mental breakdown, like was completely in tears, screaming in her pillow, all this stuff. And I read it, I'm like, exactly. That's what it is. Like that picture is a snapshot in time. And that's what I keep in mind when I look through all social media. Someone seems like, everything's, peachy and great. No person's life is perfect. It doesn't matter if they take a million perfect photos. Everyone's life has ups and downs. That's the nature of the mind. It's the nature of life. Some people in general are much happier. They're more fulfilled. Some people are much, facing tougher times. Yes, this is true. But if you look at the kind of things that are released on social media, I'm talking primarily here of Instagram. Facebook is a little bit different because people will kind of just openly vent sometimes on Facebook, not as much on Instagram. Instagram's usually, a nice picture of something happy and then some nice positive quote to go along with it.
Yeah.
But yeah, you don't see the truth of the situation. So our nervous system, our mind, our psyche, takes it as truth when we're scrolling through and seeing, all these happy people that aren't us. And we miss the point that they're just people. Like they have their own issues, they have their own problems, they have their own struggles, existential crises, and we need to always remember that. And I think that just that idea, keeping that in mind as like a counter for the automatic reaction of feeling like fear of missing out when you see other people are having a great time, is just remember that like that's just them at that time, and then you have those moments too, but maybe you didn't take a photo of it or things along the line. So I think it's important to see what the underlying truth of the situation is, because that comparison idea.
Yeah.
And then to throw in here also is this idea that, oh, because they're so, rich and famous, they must be happy. And like, you don't have to really look very deep to see that that doesn't actually lead to happiness. That doesn't lead to, let's say, a good
That's like an
experience, a
entirely
meaningful life.
different,
It's very different.
yeah, that's a very different conversation. I mean, like it does apply to this conversation, but like that's so much bigger than
Right.
just social media.
And that's what we see on social media with,
Yeah.
accounts that are particularly popular. There's this idea that, oh, if I was in that state, I would be happier. And you actually, they're all illusions. And I think the answer to what brings us fulfillment and meaning in our lives it's not a simple answer, and it's unique for each individual. And I think that's part of the reason why it's so difficult to find. And it's also evolving and growing. There's no one thing. A lot of it is the process of like, you aim for something and in the pursuit of it, you feel fulfilled, and then you reach it, and then you aim for something bigger, and then in the pursuit of it, you feel fulfilled and you feel meaning. And that's kind of the nature of the human minds. But that teaches us also that there's nowhere you can rest. There's no point where you get to where it's like, I'm done. I won life. Everything's going to be great from now on. Like, you know what I mean? That never happens. Like someone,
Yeah.
an actor becomes the most famous actor in the world. And like,
No,
right there, like what happens after that? Drugs,
that's a really good
divorce.
point.
It always peaks
No,
down
yeah.
like that, because where else can they go?
No, that's a good point. Like the construct of, I mean, I think we talked last night that like it's not just social media. I think we're kind of basing this conversation on social media because it's the most
Yeah.
easy way to talk about the
Well,
issue.
social media is an expression of us. No one's
Right.
forcing people to make the posts they do. It's really a kind of sandbox of give people unlimited ability to interact with whatever they think works, and then put in like a liking and rating system that causes people to condition each other to behave and post in a certain way, and then see what happens.
Yeah.
That's social media. It's not like it inherently is bad or good. It's
Right.
really more of an expression of us more than
Yeah. But I
anything.
think I think your point about like fame though is
Yeah,
like
exactly.
it is very yeah, that's something I've actually not thought about. Like you bring up a really good point. Like what, like, why do we celebrate these people? I don't know.
Well, any idea of everything is mixed up, right? Because as humans, we are also, we like to be admired for what we do that's good. And it feels good to us. When you do something that's good, you do something that's good for yourself or someone else, to hear someone say, "Oh, thank you so much for helping me out." That makes us feel good. So this is not necessarily a bad mechanism. It's kind of a natural, it could even be argued to be a part of our spiritual nature. But
Mm,
the like craving for the kind of attention and recognition, that almost seems like that's that feeling, but pathological. It becomes a craving for like, I need people to, notice me and this and that. And then, it, but it's always, you always need more of it, because the feeling that you get when someone congratulates you or gives you a like or something like that, it's by definition temporary. So the moment you get that good feeling, you want to get it again. And I think that's where it kind of
yeah.
spirals out into this issue of, um, people seeking to just be famous. There's this common idea in popular culture and also in psychology that anyone in general who is, urgently, fervently seeking wealth or status or fame or anything, it always comes from a place of lack. It always comes from a place of I'm missing something, and this will fill it. This will fill that. What that is, what is it? Maybe it's a lack of love. Maybe it's a lack of meaning. Whatever. It's a kind of symbol that they're seeking to fulfill. That feeling that they don't feel good enough, they don't feel worthy, etc. It's different for every person. But you'll see that a lot in people who do become like very famous and very successful. Obviously,
Mhm.
not everyone, but there are cases of people that come from very troubled lives. They never felt like they got love. They were always in poverty, so they from a young age were like, wealth is my answer to happiness and like acceptance and everything. So they just went full force, they reached it, and then there comes the epiphany, because they get everything they thought would necessarily make them fulfilled, and it didn't. And now what? And that's like that's a terrible place to be in. And I think that's where a lot of sudden downward spirals come from, when someone finally reaches all the things that they thought would really be it, the thing, the ideal. I finally reached it. Then they realize, no, like it actually isn't it. Hmm.
Yeah.
So it's, and
Yeah.
then
I
social
think
media is an
that's,
expression of that.
yeah. And that's pervasive, I think, through, it doesn't really matter if it's social media or celebrity or, CEOs or anything. Like, I think that's pervasive throughout the culture if you base your entire identity on success and
Mm.
like specifically monetary success, because there's so much more to life. And I think that that concept sort of comes from like, if I'm not rich, I'm not a good person, essentially. And I think that's especially in American culture. I don't know how many of your listeners are international, but yeah, it comes down to pretty much that in America. It's like, if you're not rich, you're not successful.
Mm.
And that's, and I mean, even I know that we opened this conversation up to um, mostly just being like social media driven, but I think that comes back to social media because so much of that uh, is driven by what you see on social media. And like, if you don't have that, you don't have anything.
Mm.
Um,
Yeah, and there's this false equation of success with this or that, when really at the fundamental level, success is an abstract notion, right? Because like, when do you actually reach success? It's, in general, it's either self-defined or it's culturally defined, right? So like, the culture that you live within has certain ideals of this is success, and then people, they chase those ideals. And then there's the self-defined success, which is, this is the way at least I put it for myself, is what what would I regret not doing in my life? What are my greatest like potentialities? What would bring me the greatest experiences, meaningfulness, usefulness to other people, insights into life? Um, what would be the expression of my greatest potential in the most wholesome way possible? That's how I think of success. And there's monetary and financial things obviously play into it to some degree, because I mean, if you're running a business or something, with money you can get more resources, you can get more people working with you, you can basically take an idea and you can put it into reality. That's what money allows you to do. It The big mistake I think with thinking about money is forgetting that it's a resource. It's not like a goal. It's not a final goal. It just gives you the ability to do what you want with it. So you can, in and of itself, you can, build schools, you can help people who are less fortunate and starving. You can help people who need healthcare. You can help people with this. You can provide a really good life for yourself and your family. You can use that money to travel and gain insights into the world and share those insights. So like, there's it's the same with social media thing. It's not like inherently bad. It's just a tool. So but we get hung up on the tool. Maybe that's the kind of big issue with social media or chasing fame or all this and that the social media, or at least let's say making an account that becomes widely known or widely distributed or something like that, it's a means to an end. It's not like the end itself. And money also is a means to an end. It's a means to an end of living a good life and doing good things for people and yourself, etc. But it's, if you think of it as the final end, I mean, where could that lead other than just unfulfillment? It's just being driven
Yeah.
purely by unfulfilled desire that will never get fulfilled because it's not something that like can be quenched.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a good point, and I think that kind of leads into the next question I was going to ask you, even though I'm the guest on this podcast. Um, as far as like spiritual impacts of, because I know you really like, seeking into like the depths of humanity and like the depths of uh, personal um, identity, I guess. I don't know how else to put it, but like the spiritual aspects of how social media might affect a person. Like, well, not just social media. I mean, obviously we've discussed that this is not just strictly a conversation about social media. But
Let's
like,
talk
how do you
about
think that?
electronics. Let's talk about electronics in general, and
Okay,
because social media is like an obvious expression of that. So, what was
yeah,
the final part of your question?
just like how do you think that impacts the spiritual aspect of your humanity? That's a
Yeah,
big question.
yeah. It definitely, it has a tendency to detract from it. It is a
Yeah,
tendency. It doesn't necessarily have to, but in general, electronics or really anything that we're like absorbed into, it takes us away from ourself. It takes us away from our own feeling, our experience of the body, our experience of our breath, our experience of our posture, our experience of our muscle tension, all these things. Like, we become unconscious when we're, caught in anything, whether that's, you know, uh, a video game or, a TV show like on Netflix, or if it's, social media scrolling. They all are, the thing that they all share in their negative aspect is that when they're done unconsciously, meaning you don't really like, you're not aware that you're there, you're not present in your body, you're not really choosing even to do it, you're more like being dragged on by it. It's like an addiction kind of, in that
yeah.
sense, where it's leading you on. And in terms of the spiritual aspect, I
Well,
mean,
can I stop you for a second,
yeah, sure.
really quick? Yeah, I totally agree. I think that it's what it comes down to is distraction, like you said. Like it's distracting you from everything else in your life. And I think the reason that I actually brought this for the listeners, I actually brought this concept of talking about to Bogdan because right now there's so many people seeking distraction and not facing like their deeper selves. So I think that's absolutely true. Is like this comes down to an issue of not wanting to face, yourself, kind
It's
of,
painful.
which is not.
Facing the shadow parts of yourself is really painful. So it's so
Yeah, it
understandable that
is.
we want to be distracted.
It's definitely understandable, and it's painful. And I would never, say that anyone is. I would never like downplay someone's perspective, like, or like where they are in their life. Like, it's hard, but I just wanted to just mention that really quick.
Yeah.
It's like, yeah.
Here's an argument in favor of how spiritual health can be improved when we either have a more conscious attitude towards our usage of electronics and social media, or we take breaks from it. So some of the most peaceful times I've ever had were when I was out in nature and either my phone wasn't with me or it was just on airplane mode. And just the fact that that is the case seems to show that we're so interconnected in that way that we lose a lot of freedom, right? Because I mean, when you leave the house and you forget your phone, you feel like, you left your leg inside, right? Like, has that ever happened to you, or you like forget your phone or something like that? And you're like, oh, I
I
needed to
mean,
call someone, talk to someone later. Now I won't be able to contact them. Like, for real practical concerns, not just because, but
no, yeah,
it
it
become
has
almost an
happened.
appendage of our own body.
Yeah,
That's what Elon
yeah,
Musk talks about. A good amount, which I think is a really good point for electronics, is, we're thinking that AI is something that's going to come, and that, cybernetic organisms or us integrating with technology is something that's going to come. But we already are. Like, we carry around a device in our pocket all the time that is really just like an extension of our minds, our will, our speech. You can text anybody and say that. You can call them. You can look something up on the internet, find some information. You can share information. So there's nothing. It's a tool. There's nothing wrong with it. But
right.
we've maybe the unconscious aspect of not using it as a tool. Because what is it? What is a tool, right? A tool is for a purpose. There's no tool that has no purpose. So maybe that's one of the big underlying issues with electronics in general, is that we don't define what is like the purpose of this. What is the purpose of my social media account? What am I trying to do? Am I trying to connect with people? Am I trying to have discussions? Am I trying to share what's important to me? Or do I have no goal and I'm just on there and I just like to look through it
Yeah,
without really any reason? And there's nothing necessarily wrong with that, but there is if it makes you feel worse, because why do
right.
that, right?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Like, I mean, as we talked last night, I think I probably said this before, but it is a tool for good. Like, it's true. Um, as I know, Bogdan, but I don't know if the listeners know, but like I do, I follow the lifestyle of following Jesus as a Christian, and part of that is a Sabbath, like taking a day or like a time away, like whether it's Sunday or any other day,
Mm.
just taking time away from a social media. Well, not just like taking time away from
from
everything.
work, and then focusing your mind on, meaning
Yeah,
and your spirit and these kind of ideas, which usually doesn't
yeah,
involve social media scrolling. So that's
right.
pretty much synonymous.
Which which is why I bring it up. Just like part of how I do that is just turning my phone off for an entire day and putting it in a drawer. And I feel like that's so impactful. And it's not to say that like everyone should be, Christian or, uh, you know, take Sabbath or anything like that. But it's just like how I sort of view that as like, a way to escape, because you mentioned before, like going into the forest, away from everything. And
Yeah.
I think that's hugely important
Well,
for
that's the
people.
the idea of fasting from food, but fasting from also stimulation, because there's not inherently anything wrong with being stimulated
Right.
by social media or like a show, but when it's so constant, it first of all, it loses its beneficial effect usually, and then it also, you
Right.
lose yourself in it. So taking those the breaks, gives you the it gives you the space to come back in and realize, why are you doing it? Like, why are you, it gives you the ability to come back in consciously, rather than just being led along by, constant, YouTube videos that are just connected to each other. But like, I want to learn about mythology, I'm going to watch a mythology video. And like, whenever you do anything consciously like that, it's always great. But when you
Yeah.
like watch things, or you scroll through and you have no, like, you fall into that way of like not thinking in terms of like coming into a consciously with what you're, because you can use social media like that, right? You can think, oh, okay, I had a really good day, this is what I learned, this is my insight. Okay, I'll post a picture related to it, and I'll write something that maybe someone else will read, and they'll be like, oh wow, like that's actually really helpful, I was feeling the same way today, like thank you for saying that. Like,
No, I
you
think
come in it consciously instead of just reactively.
that that's an excellent point. As like that, I think maybe this entire conversation could come down to is like conscious consumption
Mm.
versus unconscious consumption.
and it,
Like
and
that's a
And
yeah,
when we talk about conscious and unconscious, really what we're talking about awareness. So we're talking about
yeah.
spirituality, basically, at some level,
That's that's
right?
interesting. Huh. Yeah. Wow. That's a really good point. Yeah, that's cool.
I think that is what it is, and it seems to apply to basically everything, right? Like even in person conversations, or you call your family on the phone, and or you call a friend, or you go for a walk with someone, and to choose to live that consciously, and not just like go through patterns, and not just go, there's such a tendency, if you don't put that extra effort and you don't have that space, to just repeat patterns. This has probably happened with to you, and it's happened to me a lot of times, where I'll be talking to a friend, and I'll realize, like, I talked to them about this already, like these are things that I've said, or something like that. And especially when they're not on topics of ideas or anything necessarily meaningful, but just like just having casual talk. But then you kind of catch that, and you're like, this doesn't really leave me feeling like very connected to this person at all. So like, why are these the things that we speak of? Like, when you're talking to someone about just like the weather or something, you're like, I don't care what the weather is.
Hmm.
I
Yeah.
don't care.
That's
Like, why am I
that's funny to
talking about
say.
this?
Yeah.
Like, I'll catch myself
I'm
sometimes in the middle of it, and I'm just like, why am I talking about this? I don't want to talk about this.
yeah. Yeah. Hmm. No, I mean, like, it's kind of sad that in American culture, I mean, I don't want to speak poorly about anyone, obviously, but
America's
like
the
in America,
best, Clay. Come on, man. What are you trying to say,
oh
bro?
gosh,
No.
we said we weren't going to get political.
We're getting political. America's the best. No.
No, no, no.
No, America's
um,
another country, just like any other country. Every country
yeah,
has their
it's just like
great things and their negative things.
in the society, like it feels like there's such a disconnect between like being able to really truly relate to our brothers and sisters,
Mm.
and the spectrum of what that is.
Hmm.
Uh, like, yeah, I don't know. It brings up. There's too many conversations to have about that
We're
issue.
more connected than ever with electronics, but yet we're more isolated.
Exactly.
Is
Oh,
is
good way of
how I
putting it.
how I
Yes.
would sum it up, and that's exactly what
Yeah.
this whole quarantine situation has shown: is that we're so interconnected, but yet we're so isolated from each other at the same time.
That I couldn't have said it better. Exactly. Exactly.
That's the
Yeah.
pervading. That's the pervading And it goes deep, because in general Western culture, especially as it's been for the few last 100 years, it's really based on individualism, whereas other cultures are more based on the community. So
Yeah.
the whole, the Enlightenment and Western rationality, etc., it's all based on this idea of individual sovereignty, and that the individual is the most primary unit of society. That's not the community, it's not the tribe, etc. But this leaves us in a weird place where we're not made like that. Like, humans are, we have individual aspects, but we're social creatures. Like, you don't see in any society people really in masses living completely alone,
Yeah.
from just very basic biological survival standpoint. Like, we're not particularly strong creatures. Like, if you meet a bear in the wild, you meet a tiger, a lion, like, you have no chance. Why humans had a chance is because we would hunt in groups, and because intelligence and the ability to use tools, and the
Yeah.
ability to pass on that information through communities and all this. So we're at fundament, we're very socially linked creatures, right? So when we don't have that, when we feel like we don't have that in some sense,
Yeah.
we feel isolated, we feel sad, we feel like we don't have a purpose. And that's, I mean, that's millions of years of evolution in a sense.
Well, and I think that's a sort of a pathology of current society, because when you look back into history, like multi-generational homes were the norm, you know, and nowadays, I mean, I'm guilty of this, but like you just move away from home and live by yourself in an
Yep.
apartment.
Hmm.
um, but like that was the norm, and like that was how people maintained their, community. And
Mm.
even if you look back to the early church, of like Philippians and Colossians and all the like the very early churches, it was all about like community.
Mm.
And I think like everything was about community and like building a group of people that would like care for you and you would care for them. And we've lost that. And I think,
Hmm.
well, maybe we haven't lost it entirely. I'm sort of an optimist in that
To a
sense.
large part, it's become fragmentary. Someone will work
Yeah.
at a corporation and they don't know what they're working on or who they're even working with sometimes. And this is like a
Yeah.
wide spread issue. I mean, in New York City, there's so many people walking around that you're just filled in, a sea of people, but yet you feel so alone.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
that, I think that's the perfect picture of like when things become so big that they almost, the individual doesn't feel any real connection, because
Yeah.
there's this idea too that humans at some fundamental biological level, we work best in smaller groups of maybe like 100 people, 200 people, like where everyone knows each other, everyone's related, they're doing, help bartering, they're helping each other out, everyone knows each other, like a small town kind of idea, or like a small tribe. That's how we function. But when you abstract that out and now you live in like a big city and don't really even know your next door neighbor, I really don't know the people that live next to me in this apartment. I've been here for 4 years. And
Yeah.
I mean, I'm as much to blame as anybody for that. I could have easily just, went to knock on their door, but that idea never even came into my mind, because this is the way that we live. We live as if, that's not even really, why would you do that? What's the point, you know?
Yeah. No, I'm guilty of the same. Like I've lived in my apartment complex here for about 2 years, and like I still don't really know anyone. But I think going back to what you said, like when you have 10,000 followers on Instagram or like uh, Facebook or whatever it is, like that's still not community, But a lot of people think that, like a lot of people value that as if it was community, which is sort of scary. in my concept of what community
It
should
it
be.
can be and it can't be. It depends what that community is. Is it all people who are just, passively consuming that person's content that they're releasing, or they're people
Well,
who are
yeah.
actually having discussions? But even if they are
No, I
having
mean, that's what I
discussions,
mean.
it's still just over electronics. It's not the same
Yeah.
as a community would be if you started a town or something and you had 10,000
I
people
mean,
there.
what I mean by that is that like it it does seem more like a not like a fake community. Like it's not like
Well,
you're
it's a
actually
virtual
interacting with
community,
them.
right?
Yeah. Well, interesting. Yeah.
It is and it isn't. It is a community and also isn't. Like it's definitely not this. It definitely doesn't have the same feel that like knowing each of those people personally would. I mean, there's no way that it could possibly be like that.
Sure. But like what
An invisible community
if
kind of
you
that
is
leads
that
to a lot of
community though?
anxiety and depression.
Right. Is a virtual community actually community? Like I
So
don't know.
this is a philosophical question. I would say it's an abstract community that you would almost have to like constantly reflect on the fact that it's a community and try to like visualize the people in it and try to like establish real visceral ties to these humans, or else no, like it can't be. I mean, as far
But
as
like
your mind is concerned, it's not. As far as your psyche is concerned, it's not a real community.
I mean one of the I'm just gonna like name drop a very popular channel I follow, Tank's Good News. I don't know if you know of this channel on Instagram. But like I think he has like 2 million followers.
Mm-hmm.
And there's so much like you can't have a community, you can't really feel community in 2 million followers, because what that ends up as I've seen time and time again is like just arguments and fights and people calling each other names and stuff like that, um, over social media. And that does not equal community, because it's just people trying to like,
Mm.
you know, invade, not invade, I don't know what the proper word is, but like assert themselves in a way
Mm.
that it makes them more important, and that's not community,
I have a
you know.
wholesome counterpoint to that. I think to balance
Okay,
out the
yeah,
conversation so we
absolutely,
can reach some
awesome,
truth.
give it to me.
So it could be a spiritual community in a sense, or a community based on an idea or a way of living where people can learn from each other. So, for example, if some social media account is set up in such a way that all that they do is post about their spiritual insights, the way they live, what they found, their truth, etc., things that people can really read and be like, okay, that's helpful for me. Then anyone who is also on that path of self-discovery, or they're also trying to
Mhm.
find the answers, they're in that community with everyone else that's in it because they share like a some truth that they're aiming towards, or some way of living that they're aiming towards. So in that way, they're part of a community of an idea.
Hmm. That's an interesting thought, yeah. Huh. I
So
mean,
we're
and
within
even
the
just
natural health community, right? As like naturopathic doctors, naturopathic students, we're in this web of this idea, and this idea is that nature has a healing power, and then that spreads out into all these different professions. But at fundament, we share more in common with others that also have that idea, and though we may not know them consciously, when we see the things that they post and their information, educational information, it reminds us of our path too. So we, in that way, a community could be built around an idea or a way of living or a truth. But if it's, once again, if it's just people mindlessly consuming, then it's not a real community, because there would have to
yeah.
be interaction between the members of the community too. It can't just be, one person is at the top of the community and everyone is just following them. A real community would be a circle, right? Everyone would
Yeah.
be interacting with everyone within that community, and that person's social media page would just be kind of the hub of it or something.
Hmm.
So I think that's the wholesome spin on it. That's how it could be used beneficially to create community. Still not the same thing as, meeting up in a park with your friends. Still not the same thing.
Yeah.
You still need that. But that doesn't mean
Yeah.
that there couldn't be some use, you're home, it's late anyway. So what else are you going to do? You might as well maybe connect with somebody online.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe it just
No,
has a
for
time
sure.
and a place. As long as it
You're
doesn't
right.
interrupt your sleep patterns, because that's what we didn't talk about electronics, social media, the fact that blue light suppresses melatonin and actually
Yes.
messes up circadian rhythms. Some research showing that it'll actually, every hour of blue light past a certain time will actually push your circadian rhythm an hour forward. So
wait, say that again. Every hour?
Yeah, for every hour of exposure, your circadian rhythm will be pushed an hour forward. Something along those lines. Yeah, there's some like more specific information about how not only how just while you're looking at blue light, how that suppresses melatonin, that's the sleep hormone that helps you fall asleep, but that it changes that circadian rhythm, that falling asleep pattern, and has long lasting impacts. So, you watch a lot of TV before, even a few hours before bed, and you are laying in bed, you can't sleep. So that's an aspect of electronics too that needs to be considered, and probably a good portion of what the negative influence of electronics and social media is like, okay, imagine combine all the things, the unconscious scrolling, you got a bright screen and it's like 1 a.m.
Yeah.
Which is, you're laying down resting. A lot of people do that. I do that too a lot of times, and I have to kind of stop and throw it to the side.
I mean, like I'm wearing these because they're blue light blocking glasses because I'm looking at a screen. But yeah, no, I was totally like about to say that maybe we could talk about the physical impacts, like physical health impacts of social media. And I think, first of all, sleep for sure is one of them. And eating disorders. I don't know if you remember a lot. I don't know
too much about that.
I meant to actually pull up some articles so I could have some statistics. I didn't have a chance to, but like since the popularization of Instagram, eating disorders have gone up to like astronomical levels, as have suicide rates based on people feeling inadequate. And I think that's potentially it's both psychological and physical, but I think the concept of particularly eating disorders is more of a physical issue. And I don't know, I just wanted to mention that as an issue to consider when you think about social media, and just it permeates into Hollywood as well.
Yeah. Well, that's societal ideals in general, like the ideal person, the ideal body shape, all this that expresses itself in all forms of media. Actually, we can broaden it out, like movies and magazines and all this. But with social media, it's so direct and it's so,
it's like
in your face.
It's in your hand 24/7.
Yeah.
And
I can see how that would influence that. Yeah. I mean, if someone already feels bad about how they look, then when they see, somebody who is the way that maybe they wish that they looked, and then they see all the positive recognition they're getting, and all this, that makes them feel worse because they feel like they can't get that, or maybe they overcompensate, and then it becomes like pathological, like a eating disorder where they can't even control the.
And then there's the other direction where they don't necessarily try to attain that, but they just feel that they're not worthy of care or love, and they go towards the direction of like drug abuse, alcohol abuse, all those things, because they think like, I'm never going to attain this, and it's like really sad and pathological, and it permeates society. I don't know.
There's two sides to this too, because it's not, I don't know if it's even social media that's causing it. It's almost like it's there as a trigger for something that's already there in that person's mind and their way of perceiving, right? So I'll give you an example. There is at least two ways to respond to the situation of seeing someone being where you wish you were. The first response is, jealousy or feeling bad about yourself, etc. But there's another response you can have, which is actually inspiration, or being like, oh, they did that. I can do that too. Actually, well, why not? They're just a human. I'm just a human.
Yeah. No, that's
Same
very, very
image,
true.
same image, same story, same everything. Or maybe it could even come from like a higher wisdom of like seeing it like, oh, that's just like superficial beauty. Like, why do I even care about something like that? Like
No,
but
that's a good point.
right. So that there's that aspect of it too, that the fundamental way of perceiving it is the issue is there already, even before social media. The social media just exacerbates and it plays on it. And when we get into like advertising and things like that, then it's, a conscious manipulation of those feelings to make people feel like they're inadequate. So they need to buy the product, right? To trigger those feelings so that they have to make up for it. That's social media is not necessarily that consciously doing it, although there's a lot of advertisement on social media. So yes, it's also doing that.
Yeah.
So in those cases, yes, it's you have to have like a strong psychic shield to not fall into that and to know your worth regardless of what you see.
Yeah, it's definitely there are, implicit, like deeper like I'll say issues. I don't mean that as a derogatory term, but like that people face, that sort of social media or movies or Hollywood or whatever
deep
it is,
pains, deep wounds, traumas,
that
these kind
it
of things
brings out.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, for sure. But I think social media and movies and Hollywood and all these things, just like they're a catalyst, for those concepts. But you are right. Like, yeah, it 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 can. I don't know. I'm not gonna give any treatment advice or medical advice or anything, but there are ways to go about fighting that concept as well. Like you said, like it's not so ingrained in the I don't know what I'm trying to say. But yeah, no, you're right. You're right.
Yeah, it's how we come to it too. I mean, if something makes us feel bad in general, there's also like an indication that there's a wound there that's still. I'll give you an example. So somebody, insults you on Facebook, right? And then you get really upset, very angry, or you lash out, or you feel bad about yourself or something like that. It takes two to tango. Like there's some hurt there that's maybe not conscious that like got triggered. So that person who insulted you, not you in particular, but anybody, had some some they obviously brought forward that thing that made you feel bad, but you also feel bad because of your own reasons that are just as worthy to look into, because if you look into those reasons, then the next time a person insults you, you may actually not feel bad because you'll know, oh, that's just their opinion. And like, I actually feel fine about myself and I don't have to judge my self-esteem based on what people think of me, which is a more kind of sturdy standpoint. So that's kind of just, there's two sides of it. It's not saying that, people that are insulting, like that they're not to blame for causing hurt to people. Obviously they're part of that. But what can we do as people, who might be subject to that, is we work on our own minds and work on our own healing, work on our own resolving our own trauma so that we can not be so influenced by other people's attempts to hurt us. I mean, that's a great strength to be able to not be influenced by other people's negativity, right? Especially when it's directed.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. We've had conversations about that recently.
Yes, we have. Yes, we have indeed.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think, well, first of all, you make great points. Like, absolutely, I agree with those. But I kind of wanted to come back around to I don't know. I keep coming back to social media, even though this conversation isn't necessarily only about social media. But you mentioned advertisements.
Mm,
Um, I think that's one of the things that I think is the worst about social media,
mm.
specifically Instagram,
Yeah, it's
because a
become
couple years
a
ago,
advertising location mainly.
yeah, and that follows. People fall into the trap of seeing fitness models, propagating their concepts on well, obviously their perfect bodies, uh, for people to see and be like, why shouldn't I be like that? But also it propagates um, people seeing stuff like products that they want,
Mm,
and they end up like getting like just buying, and then finding themselves in financial uh, distress after a while because they're just like driven to just purchase what they see
mm.
that is so frivolous, for the most part, and and just it's marketed beautifully because it's Instagram, so like everything looks good. But yeah, I don't know. It's
Yeah,
another
it's influencing influencing people's minds. Like, you have
yeah,
a soda commercial. I'm not going to say which company it is. And it's like, you know, two people and they're like in love and they're having like a great old time. And like, then they hold up the cans and they drink them. And it's like, th- what that's on some level it's hard to say what the intentions of the person who created the commercial are. Maybe they really meant to just show, oh, you can be happy if you have this, soda or something like that. But
mhm,
the effect that actually has on the psyche is like somebody who feels, that that's something that they want. It's not even
yeah,
about the soda, it's about the experience that the soda represents. And that's manipulation is what it is, because everyone knows that like ain't no soda gonna make you find love. Like that's a lie, that's false
yeah,
advertisement first of all.
yeah,
As far as I'm concerned, so like, you know there's that aspect, and in some cases it is conscious manipulation. Like you see these YouTube videos and like I'm getting so tired of these people making these weird faces on YouTube videos. You know what I'm talking about? Like they'll make like a
no, what do you mean?
they'll go like this,
Oh,
like you'll be
like
scrolling through and like
the thumbnails.
yeah,
Yeah,
exactly. It's so
yeah,
annoying because, and this is particularly why it's so annoying, is because it makes me stop and I'm about to click it. Like, because they're devised in a way, they're like manipulating our like limbic system, our like primal brain to be like, oh, somebody's shocked. I want to see what that is. Or, if somebody just on the street just goes, like you're gonna look and want to see, but that's being manipulated to like something that's not even related. They're like, and then they're like, selling popsicles or something. I don't know, like something
yeah,
ridiculous. It has nothing to do
yeah.
with
It's
that.
like
And it's not
world's
shocking.
world's best hot dog or
Yeah.
something like
It's
that.
all those.
Yeah,
Yeah. And I, on principle, will not click those videos. They'll make me
yeah,
stop and I want to click, but I will restrain myself because I just don't want to participate in this. Like,
yeah,
it's not even necessarily anything bad that they're doing. They understand, they saw, oh, this gets me more views. But I mean, what are you willing to do for views? Just like make all sorts of weird faces on your videos just so that people will click it. It's weird.
yeah,
It's weird,
yeah,
especially when you see like what are really the top videos on YouTube, the ones that really get hundreds of millions of views, and especially the ones that get hundreds of millions of views for no merit. Like they're complete like fluff videos. They're about some like they're really nonsensical. They're not like meaningful content. But because
yeah,
you know it lets you flow into that unconscious state and you just watch them, you don't really think about it, and they have very catchy titles and they're very bright, so you click them.
yeah,
There's
yeah.
these videos on YouTube. Have you seen these for kids? They'll have these videos of uh people opening up like toys and like wrappers and like opening up cards and like opening up presents. Like literally it'll just be a 20-minute long YouTube video of like unwrapping presents. And like, that's all they do. They're just unwrapping presents. They're like opening up toy boxes. They're like looking at what's inside. And kids will literally just watch them for hours. They get millions of views.
Really?
Yeah. Because it gives them that,
I've never seen that.
you haven't? It's scary.
No.
It's scary when you see it. You're like, oh, okay, this is what's going on with consumer culture. It's weird, right?
That is scary, actually.
Watch one of them and then see how weird it is. And like, you'll be like, oh, this is actually like, it gives you some feeling of, you know, like that excitement you get when you open a fortune cookie. But imagine that with like toys. But imagine the whole video is just an hour of people doing that. And that's the whole video. That's the whole premise of it. It's to give that dopamine response or something.
For children.
For children who don't have discernment, who don't have like a real, you know, like rational decision. Like, I don't want to watch this for 2 hours. They just will just click. I mean, they're unsupervised.
That's weird. Like I have a kind of an interest in pediatrics. Mm-hmm. So like, just to hear that, it's kind of like, wow, like I had no idea. And like, that's really impactful for a young mind.
Yeah. And electronics in general, you know, like all the different, we're in a sense, like I grew up around electronics, you know, but the generation younger than me, they were like out of the womb with electronics. Like they're on phones and iPads and stuff from like a few years old. And
no, I remember,
the case like for me. I at least had some like development period in my life where there was really no phones. There was no cell phones.
Yeah, no, my ex-girlfriend, like I remember she had a very young sister, and like I don't know, her sister was maybe 3 at the time, and they were already giving her like iPhones and iPads and stuff like that, and I was just like, that's so weird to me. Like,
and it's hard to say, you know, what will happen. Like, is it going to necessarily all be bad? Is there going to be good aspects to it? I mean, they're going to be great when it comes to using technology, though. Like, so, and the world of the future seems to be a world that keeps moving more and more into technology. So they're actually being adapted to the world that is to come. But at what price to their mental health? At what price to their spirit? At what price to their ability to concentrate, focus, pay attention to anything when everything is so, you know, clickbaity and everything is so pop and quick short clips and this and that. Like, who has time to read a book from cover to cover, like a long one, right? Like, it doesn't give you that amount of stimulation that, you know, just watching little short YouTube video clips does, or scrolling through unconsciously. So there's a competition. And like on one end, you have meaningful content that takes more work and effort and concentration to get to, but it ultimately has more reward. And on the other hand, you have quick, you know, instant gratification media.
And then by the end of finishing that book, you've reached so many like deeper parts of yourself, because reading a book is so much more, you know, interactive, that it's by the, like when you turn the last page and close the book, you feel good about yourself, whether you see it as that way or not. That's pretty much what it is.
And books are a kind of technology too. It's interesting. I wonder if when books first came out, there was people in the streets saying like, books are going to be the end of us all. And like, people are going to stop thinking for themselves and just believing what they read in books. I bet there was like that. There had to have been, right?
Well, like, what does when books first came out mean? Like, I mean,
I guess like when like the printing press, like when books first became, you know, like, because people were always writing on papyruses and manuscripts and stuff. That's right. Thousands of years. But I mean, like when books became mass producible, where like everyone could read the book. That's what I'm talking about.
The printing press.
The printing press, yeah.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, that's I don't know. I mean,
because you could argue that books too like impacted the way we think, right? Because it made us more language based in our thinking, and that's questionable.
And isn't that why the Nazi, like the Third Reich, burned like most books, you know? So who knows? That's an entirely different conversation.
Yeah,
it is a good point to bring up.
That's probably more like suppression of information. That's probably more suppression of like alternate viewpoints. Because any alternate viewpoint challenges the, conventional viewpoint. So that's
Mhm.
any regime who's trying to maintain power at all costs doesn't want, this is a common aspect of history. Religion comes in and they destroy all the old temples because they offer a counterpoint. And, if you want to be the only one in town, you got to get rid of all competitors, which could be ideas, that could be histories, that could be, and that's a lot of premise of 1984 by George Orwell is like that, where history is reprinted and deleted, and no one knows what the real history is anymore. So they go along with the totalitarian regime without even knowing it because they don't have anything to compare it to. That's just their life.
Yeah.
That's how it's always been. That's a good way.
Yeah, that's why I said it's a different conversation, because we could go down that rabbit trail for like another hour potentially.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, I think we reached upon a lot of essential points to really,
I don't know if we
electronics and media, that in a sense, the main thing is to remain aware, to remain conscious of how you use it, to remain conscious of how children use it, or how people you're taking care of use it, to be conscious of that. The influence could be great that we don't see, and it could be a negative influence. We just don't know that. We don't have really enough time with these technologies to see. We just see what's around us. We just see, the feeling of meaninglessness that's present in a lot of people's lives, and the, tremendous rates of anxiety and depression in this country. And of course it's for all sorts of reasons, but to say that it's not related to our disconnect fundamentally from nature on some degree, from our disconnect from a community, say from a real disconnect from real social environments. I mean, has to be a big part of it. It has to be.
Yeah. And I think this conversation, this episode of the podcast it doesn't present solutions. It presents questions.
Yeah, definitely questions.
And I think, and I think that's sort of the point, is that like, we just need to start considering these things and like paying attention.
Right. Well, that's what follows from the idea of use it consciously, because how does one use it consciously? That's for every person to decide. That's the ultimate question. Is like, how can you use it in a way that is beneficial to your life? Or how can you see that maybe it's not beneficial for your life, and then just not use it and be okay with it as like a conscious choice? Either way. I mean, if you're going to use it, then use it for the betterment of your life and others. If you're not going to use it, then don't.
Yeah.
I guess that's
I think it comes down to that. Yeah. And just for the listeners, I just think like, just consider those thoughts. That's what it comes down to. Yeah, absolutely.
I'm interested to see too, where it all progresses, because, Instagram, Facebook, all these things, they came around in the past, several years, and became really prominent in the last, like, what was it, probably like 5-10 years or something like that. What's next? Like the idea of our technology, especially electronic, continues to grow, continues to advance, and our fundamental need to interconnect with each other and share information is always present. So this idea of social media in the future, I mean, it's really a question of like how societies, how individuals, how communities, how everyone will evolve into communicating with each other through whatever technologies and tools that we have, because they're always changing, they're always progressing, growing, degrading. I mean, certain social media platforms have been in like a strong degrade lately. I don't know if you've noticed that, but just the amount of like just advertising on some platforms has become untenable. It's hardly even social media anymore. It's more like self-promotion media.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
It's unfortunate, but it's the way it is. So we got to find our place within it, or not find our place within it.
Yeah, I mean, as a public health you know, historically as a public health professional, like I feel like I have to find my place within it personally, because it permeates and has a very huge role in public health, community health, how people interact, and also how they um, just even like approach their own physical and emotional health. So like there is an aspect that like needs to be approached and like given attention, but um, potentially that's not everyone's role. So I
Right.
do understand that. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a tool. It's going back to that's a tool. You
Yeah.
could use it for the benefit or sharing good information, or you can use it unconsciously, and that's okay too. There's nothing like wrong about using it in whatever way you please. But the question of like, is it really the
Well, it's
way
just
that you
like,
want to use it? That's really the fundamental
it's,
question.
you can just look at it as alcohol. Like you can have a few drinks with friends on the weekend, but if you abuse it and have a fifth of vodka every night, it's an issue.
Yeah,
And I
exactly.
mean, social.
Same thing with electronics and social
Yeah.
media. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
It's
exactly.
moderation too. And
Yeah.
noticing the
I
harmful
guess.
impacts and what you're seeking to get out of it. Cause right. No one is like an alcoholic because they want to be,
Right.
right? Like
Yeah.
it's filling something in their life, like suppressing some kind of pain or something like that, which
Yeah.
is what.
I think every conversation that we have comes back to moderation
Mm,
in some way. I'm realizing that right now.
yeah.
But
And that's the hard thing to find is like the balance is the simplest thing, but the hardest thing to find, right? Like in life in general or
especially right now.
today. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
For
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah.
Well, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on, Clayton
Yeah.
Leaders. Thank you for the discussion. It was very fruitful. Definitely gives a lot of ideas for how to move forward in this world that's increasingly connected through technology and social media. And even just talking about it reminds me to be more conscious on social media. So I think it's always a good conversation to have, because
Yeah.
there is.
I think that was the kind of the point, I think, and why I brought the topic up. So I'm glad, I'm happy to be back on. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll be posting promos on social media of this podcast episode. Isn't that ironic?
It is ironic. I actually realized that like as we started it, but it's okay. It's a tool, like you said.
It's a critical tool of the medium of which it will be posted on. I actually think that'll be very funny.
Yeah. I mean, and for the listeners, like we did, Bogdan was here at my apartment, and we talked for like an hour about this topic. So
there's a lot to, and there will be a lot more to say, right? Because this is a evolving reality with us.
Right.
So it's here to stay until the electricity goes out.
Yeah.
All right. I hope you have a pleasant night. Thank you, everyone.